You're very welcome to the Clonfert Diocesan Museum as part of the Loughrea Medieval Festival 2021. The Diocesan Museum houses church artefacts associated with this area, with the Diocese of Clonfert and its parishes. We have in our museum items connected back to the medieval period. And we have, of course, many items connected to the Celtic revival of arts and crafts, which is so much part of the cathedral history. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is a vestment which was presented to Aughrim Parish Church in the year 1858, but its connection goes back to 1691. The vestment itself is not medieval, but it has a connection with medieval times. The vestment was presented in 1858 to the parish of Aughrim by a chaplain to Napoleon III. He happened to be in Balinequil at the opening of the church in Balinequil at the time. He was part of Cardinal Wiseman's entourage. Wiseman was touring Ireland and he preached at the opening of the church in Balinequil. So they took the opportunity to present this vestment to the parish of Aughrim because the Battle of Aughrim of 1691 saw the fall of St. Ruth and many of the French soldiers who died on the battlefield. And Napoleon III wanted them to be remembered and have Mass celebrated in the parish church of Aughrim for them. And so the second thing I'll draw your attention to is the collection of chalices and silverware associated with the diocese, housed here now in the museum. The oldest of which is the Matthias McGrath chalice, dated 1500. At the moment it's not on display in the museum because we have loaned it to our friends in the Galway City Museum to enhance their exhibition at this time, but it will be returning here to its home in the Clonfert Museum shortly. The next oldest chalice from the McGrath chalice is the Balinequil Chalice, which is dated 1620. There is an extensive collection of chalices and silverware here in the museum, all of them associated with the Diocese of Clonfert from various parishes throughout the diocese, and they all have a strong historic link with this place. And another item I draw your attention to in the museum is the Kilcarbon Madonna. It's a wooden statue of Our Lady and the Child Jesus. It's dated the late 12th, early 13th century. Kilcarbon was where the Dominicans had a foundation, but by the time they came to set up their foundation there, this statue was already quite old because they came there in the 1400s. Where else are you going to find a statue, a wooden statue, dating from the late 12th to the early 13th century? It's here in the museum in Loughrea, the Clonfert Diocesan Museum, and it's very much part of our heritage and our history. Its strong association with Kilcarbon and with the parish of Tina. And beside this statue of Our Lady and the Child Jesus, which we refer to as the Kilcarbon Madonna, there's also another very old statue, wooden statue of St. Catherine, and that dates from the 15th century. We have some other wooden figures and other wooden statues dating back quite a long time as well. So it's unique to think that here in a small place in the west of Ireland, we have wooden statues that date back to the late 12th century. And so they're just three highlights of what's in the museum here in Loughrea. There are a lot of other things to be experienced and to wonder at here in the museum. Some of the items here in the Clonfert Diocesan Museum have been on display in the National Museum. Indeed, some of them have been on display abroad, and some of them, as I said earlier, have been on display and are on display in the Galway City Museum. But this is their home here, this small museum attached to the Cathedral in Loughrea, a small town in the west of Ireland, in a small diocese of Clonfert. And we have here a real treasure. And I hope that you'll have an opportunity to behold this treasure as we keep it here for future generations.
Hello, I'm Anna O'Donnell, and I'm here at the Medieval Moat in Loughrea. And today we're going to talk about the history of honey. It's a very fascinating history of that wonderful sweet thing that everybody loves. And it goes back centuries and centuries and centuries. There's an 8,000-year-old cave painting in a cave in Spain of a man climbing a ladder to catch the lovely nectar from the bee's nest. And the ancient Egyptians used honey in their embalming. They used the bees' wax to fashion their hairstyles. In ancient Greece, they believed that it gave you immortality. The Celts felt that in heaven the rivers ran with mead. So honey is a very important thing. And in Ireland, honey first came to Ireland with a Welsh monk. And he was a beekeeper in Wales, and he came back to his native land of Wexford, and the bees followed him. Evidently, bees are very loyal. And so they came here, and the people of Ireland began to enjoy honey, but they were very important to monasteries because not only did they use the honey, they used the beeswax for making their candles. And if you can see here, this is a bit of honeycomb, and you can this is the wax on the top. And if you shave it, you can roll it and put a wick in the middle, and you have candles. The monks also used the wax to make tablets, so they could do their writing and practice their writing and practice their scribing. So honey was very significant for so many reasons. The Brehon Laws had 20 pages on honey. If you had a hive, your neighboring 4 neighbors were entitled to a portion of the honey, because if your flowers were growing and the bees came and got their nectar to make their honey, they'd go back to your hive, and so your neighbors were entitled to some of that honey. If you were stung by a bee and you could go back to the owner of the hive, you were also entitled to be given some honey. So honey was so significant in so many ways. And today I'm going to talk about 2 different recipes from medieval times. The first one is for a honey cake. So this honey cake would have been made with 3 ingredients. And first of all, you have eggs, and you would beat those eggs with a whisk. Now this is a modern whisk, but in medieval times you would have taken some good strong twigs and tied them together in order to beat those eggs. And you'd get a pretty tired arm beating the eggs for a good long time. And then you add a mug, 3/4 of a mug of honey, and you'd continue to beat the eggs until this thickened. And then you would use 3/4 of a mug of oat flour. So this is our oat flour, and wheat flour didn't actually exist at the time. They used wheat and barley flour. They would even make flour out of acorns and different kinds of nuts. So you have your eggs, your honey, and your flour, and you mix that mixture together, and we would put it into a pan like this. And then the recipe says that you place that on with hot coals. So this is the hearth here, and the hot coals are underneath, and you'd put this cast iron pot, put that on top, and in the recipe it says bake it for the time a candle burns down. So that's about 180 temperature and about 45 minutes to bake the cake. So then when the cake's done, it's tasty, but it tells you to then poke the cake all around and pour the honey over it. So it's a very lovely, sweet treat. So I'm gonna it's a coldish day today, so the honey's not moving quite as quickly as it might. So you'd let that honey soak in there, and you'd have a delicious, wonderful treat. Now, the next thing is mead, which is the honey liqueur. And they found 4,000-year-old samples in China of a honey alcohol-based beverage. And we know that it was very popular in Ireland, in the British Isles. And what the earliest recipe says, take 3/4 rainwater, so we'd put the bucket out, get the rainwater in it, and 1/4 honey, and cover it and put it in the sun for 40 days. And then it would turn into a lovely mead. But as time went on and people were doing travel, which they did pilgrimages, the Crusades were also happening. So you might be able to get cloves, wonderful cloves, and bring back some lemons from Spain. And so you could put some of the cloves, some of the lemons in with the honey and the rainwater, and over time that would become lovely, lovely alcoholic mead. And there's a term, the honeymoon. And a honeymoon was when a bride and groom were married, they were given a month's supply, 28 days, which is the cycle of the moon. So they were given 28 days worth of mead to drink. So they felt it promoted happiness, frivolity, fertility, and all of those wonderful things that you would love to have on your honeymoon. It'd be good to get a honeymoon for 28 days now, but that's pretty rare. So also, a very popular medieval dish is something called stirabout. And this is Pinhead Oatmeal. And Pinhead is not as refined as the flakes you get now. And stirabout, you would boil this in milk, and you would then add the honey afterwards. So it's basically your breakfast porridge, but they could eat that any time of the day. And on the medieval table, you would almost always have a bit of honey sitting in front of your plate. And you would take your bread and dip it in the honey. You would take your beef and dip it in the honey. You would take your salmon and dip it in the honey. Everything was dipped in honey. And in fact, honey was very significant to people of the higher echelons. The king and queen of Connacht once had a young chieftain visiting, and the daughter of the tribe was the beekeeper, and she basted a salmon with honey, and it was fed to the young chieftain. So that would have been something that was a very vital part of the society at the time. So you should really try sometime to just take a little bit of bread and dip it in the honey. Who needs biscuits? The simple things in life are always the best.
It's so peaceful here. It's hard to believe that it's just a stone's throw to the town centre. This is the Walks in Loughrea, County Galway, and it's a beautiful promenade just at the back of Main Street. It's very easily accessed. It's accessible to everybody. It can be used by people using buggies or wheelchairs, and it's an area in Loughrea that we are very proud of. This is probably everybody's favourite tree. We're guessing it's the oldest tree in town, and it's quite a character because if you look around the other side, the tree actually has its own face. This is the Walks River, and it's of vital importance to the Loughrea lake fishery. From November to March each year, the trout come up from the lake to breed here in the river. And then when the eggs are hatched, the baby trout are fingerlings. They use this river as a nursery to grow until they're big enough to go back into the lake. But the stream is actually much more than this. It's a man-made stream. In fact, it's the only still functioning medieval moat in Ireland. And how did that come about? Well, the town of Loughrea was formed in 1236 by the Anglo-Norman knight Richard de Burgo. So if you could try and imagine what the Normans would have seen when they came to this location, why would they set up a town here? Well, the town was a good location in that it was a gateway to Connacht, but also you had the lake, Loughrea Lake, which provided a natural fortification to one side of the town. You also had a river coming out of the lake on the east side, which flowed down along here. So if you just imagine, the lake is here, there's a natural river here, And then what he did was he built a channel about 800 metres in length around this side to form a ring of water around the town. This moat has been functioning since the mid-1200s, but it still flows today and still delimits the town centre as it did in medieval times. It's not exactly known when the walkway was put in place, but we do know that it was in existence by 1791. There's a town map of the estate, and on it it's named as the Clanrickard Walk and River. So it was probably laid down someplace in the mid to late 1700s. And Clanrickard, who was the landlord of the time, he was really following a trend where it was fashionable to put in these natural looking parkways where the gentry of the day could take the air. So what they would have done was they would have narrowed the moat, they would have had a stone lining from the riverbed up to the top of the bank, and these walls as we see them would probably have been built at this time. So over the years, the walls here, all the masonry elements, the bridges, the stone lining, they've just fallen into a horrific state of disrepair, no maintenance, and as you can see, a lot of vegetative growth and ivy damaging the actual structures. So in 2017, Galway County Council commissioned a conservation plan for this area, specifically to address restoring the masonry elements. And when that plan was complete, a number of people came together locally to set up a committee, really to see if funding could be got to do the work and to ensure that the work was done in an appropriate way. So the Walks Project Committee was set up, and we set about doing funding applications. We got funding under a scheme known as the Outdoor Recreation Infrastructure Scheme. Now, this is a scheme which is funded by the Department of Community and Rural Affairs, and it's administered by Galway County Council. It's a 5-year programme overall. To date, we've year 1 work done, year 2 work done. The 3rd phase is due to start this year, and then all going well, 2 more phases of work to complete the works. Under phase 1 of the conservation work, we restored, repaired, conserved almost 100 metres of wall. The 2nd phase of works then, which happened last year in 2020, all of the stone bridges were repaired, a few sections of stone lining, and site works carried out to inform this year's work. It's a tricky enough project. There's a lot of considerations, environmental, ecological, archaeological, and one which restricts us quite a lot is that because due to fishery legislation, in-stream works can only be carried out during the months of July, August, September and October. So with conservation, we have to be mindful of a number of things. In the first instance, it's so important that we get conservation contractors who are experienced in this type of work. It's not just about throwing up a stone wall with cement. It's conservation, it's building, it's use of lime. And lime is hugely important in conservation work. Lime would have been used back in the day before people had cement. And nowadays lime is used in conservation for a number of reasons. Firstly, it allows stone to breathe. So the moisture has to go in and out. If you use cement, the moisture can't get out through the joints and it'll eventually wear down and decay the stone. Secondly, and very important for near water, lime allows great flexibility. So it allows a bit of movement, whereas with cement, the freeze-thaw action with cement, if water gets into the cracks and they expand and then they contract and it cracks, then with cement you have just a crack, whereas with lime will actually self-heal, it'll close itself up again. And the other thing that I think is interesting to note, if you look at the walls here, they were only repaired 2 years ago, and already the type of growth that you would want on them, like all those little plants that support biodiversity, they grow back, whereas if that had been done with cement, they wouldn't grow back. The other thing that's really important is that the wall is maintained. And if you can see here, already there's little spots of ivy coming through. And Loughrea Anglers Association, who've been very active in the project here and who manage the fishery, they've undertaken to remove the damaging growth off the walls as part of their annual river maintenance programme. So maintenance is really important, that in 50 years' time there isn't a group doing the same thing as we did. We're very lucky in Loughrea to have this unique historic walkway in the heart of our town. It's a place where the past is very much present, and through the repair work and the conservation work, we hope that this place will be in good shape for future generations.
I hope to be able to give you an introduction of the kind of cooking and some of the foods that may have been available during medieval times in Loughrea. It would be impossible to state exactly what people ate and how they cooked. I'm also conscious that there was some form of cooking taking place here in this area before the Normans arrived. And like everything else, people learned and experimented with ingredients to achieve some sort of satisfaction and culinary skill. In Celtic times, cheese, milk and meat formed the main part of the diet. Pork seems to be the main meat used in festive times, as was mutton and venison.
Now, what we're doing today is pork. Pork being one of the oldest meats in the hunting times many years ago. And in fact, they say that the boar was responsible for roasting. It appears that one night there was a thunderstorm and a lightning storm in a forest, and a lot of the animals were killed and roasted, and that's how roasting came into Ireland.
Our Celtic forefathers were happy enough to cook initially in a fulta fiada. This was a depression in the ground which held water, which was then heated with stones. By medieval times, iron had become more common, and it was used in a variety of ways. The main way of cooking, of course, was in open fires, either in the open or against a stone wall. A ventilation channel for a chimney would also be used to remove the smoke. Fish must have been an excellent source of food in the area. There is a 4.2 square kilometre freshwater lake next to the town, so a supply of all year round fresh coarse fish and eels. The Fahy family had the rights to sell eels up to modern times.
Another colleague who is going to demonstrate two forms of smoking with one of Ireland's most traditional fishes, the sea trout or the lake trout. And I suppose in Ireland, the trout and unbradon are probably two of the most traditional fishes that the country has been associated with through centuries.
Seasonal fruits and vegetables were used. The Normans brought in rudimentary carrots and turnips. Loughrea during Norman times was a very important place. A gateway to Connacht, it was a statement of influence and dominance over the native people. It had all the fabric of a fortified town, but it also had an ample supply of food to sustain its population, as there are suggestions from the archaeologists that Loughrea may have been more important to the burgos as a recreational retreat rather than an economic centre. This could be further enhanced by the level of food production and gastronomy that may have taken place in the Loughrea during medieval times.
Hi, I'm Rachel from Loughrea Craft Club, and I'm here today as part of the Loughrea Virtual Medieval Festival, and we're going to do a couple of craft mini makes. So I'm going to show you how to make a really cool Jester's hat and a collar to go with it. So for this project you're going to need scissors, coloured card, a ruler, a marker, a glue stick, a stapler and some ribbon. So I'm going to start by showing you how to make this Jester's hat. So we're going to start with a piece of coloured card. I've got A3 size, which isn't quite big enough for my head, so I'm going to cut 2 strips for the headband. Now I have to join my 2 strips together. I'm going to do that with the stapler. Now we want to get the size of your band right, so you can either do this yourself or get an adult to help. So literally just hold it up to your head and then get the size right, and then we're just going to staple it together. I always make sure the smooth side of the staple is on the inside of the band. Now we're going to make the points for our Jester's hat. So I've chosen 3 different colours of card. I've got blue, green and red, but you can choose whatever colours you like. So we take our 3 pieces of card and we want to draw out points on each of them. So I'm going to measure the base. For mine it's going to be 14 centimetres. You might want to make it a little bit narrower because your head's narrower than mine. And then draw a point. Do that 3 times and then cut them all out. So next we want to attach our points onto the band, which is very simple. We just do that with the stapler. Now it's looking a bit more like a crown than a jester's hat. So what we need to do is just fold the card down so it's a bit more floppy looking. Next I'm going to cut out some colourful shapes out of my leftover card, and it'll cover up the staples and make the hat look a lot more fun. So as you can see, I've got a few different shapes cut out now, circles and diamonds and triangles, but you can use whatever shapes you want. And I'm now going to glue them onto the hat. So simply take your shapes and then pop a little bit of glue on the back and then just glue them over anywhere where the staples are. And just go around the whole hat doing that. So the last thing to do on our jester's hat is add 3 baubles to the end. If we had bells, we could use bells, which would also be good. But what I'm going to do today is just take some yellow coloured card and draw 3 circles and then cut them out. So we have our baubles drawn and cut out, and finally we just need to attach them to the 3 points just using a bit of glue. So we've added the 3 baubles and that finishes off our jester's hat nicely. And now I'm going to show you how to make the collar to go with it. So this is our jester's collar and I'm going to show you how to make that now. So the first thing we need to do is take a piece of ribbon that's going to be long enough to go around your neck. So something like that. You can measure it and just cut it to size. I've picked out some more coloured cards. You might have some offcuts left over from the hat. So I've got a few different colours here. We're going to just simply draw some smaller triangles and that's going to form the collar. So you've cut out your 5 different points and next we're going to attach them to the ribbon. So you want to find the middle of the ribbon. So you fold it in half and then just place it on the table. Take your glue stick and just put a good amount of glue at the top and then just place the ribbon onto it a couple of centimetres down. Press it down and then another bit of glue onto the ribbon and simply just fold the card over to secure it in place. So you're going to repeat that 4 more times with your 4 other points. There's our 5 points stuck down now onto our ribbon, and now what I'm going to do is add some baubles to the end. So we're going to take some yellow card again, draw 5 circles and cut them out. There's my 5 circles cut out, and the final stage is now just to glue them to the end of each point with my glue stick. Ta-da! There's your finished jester's hat and jester's collar. Hopefully you won't look as silly as me. In part 2, I'm going to show you how to make a jester's stick for making mischief at the medieval fair.
We're here in the Caramelized Abbey at Loughrea. This building was built around 1200 by the Anglo-Normans. But what we're looking at here today are actually the medieval windows associated with the Abbey. And I suppose one of the things that we notice that there are 3 distinctive styles of window here. There's a series of windows here that date back to the original foundation in 1200. Those are to my right here on the south wall, and also the outer frame of the east window, which would have been the principal window here within the choir. The lancet windows here to my right are very, very simple windows. But what we get here is we get windows with splays, this single lancet But the one element that's missing from this is the actual glass, stained glass that was here. But we do know that there was stained glass here, because if we examine the actual window itself, we see that there are holes for glazing bars here. And this clearly tells us that there was glass. It doesn't tell us that it was painted or stained glass, but we know from other buildings of that period that both coloured and stained glass was an important element of high status buildings like this. And of course, the most important window here in the Abbey would have been the east window, the window that illuminated the altar. And we'll take a closer look at that window. This is the east window. It's a multi-phase window. In the first phase, we actually see some of the early work here. We actually see the moulding up along the side here, the base, those little intersections along the shaft of the column itself, and then we have a capital on the top. This would have been a window made up probably of 5 openings, tall lancets, with the central one probably taller than the rest, or maybe even 3 of the centre ones coming down in an order. As I said, this dates from the 13th century, from the original building of the Abbey itself. Then, for the second phase, in the 15th or maybe even early 16th century, we see this other window inserted. The older window has fallen out of use for some reason or other, and this switch-line tracery, this late medieval switch-line tracery window is installed. Much bigger, much bulkier, but one of the things we see here within the window itself and within the tracery is the use of a glazing groove to take the lead cames that hold the glass. And also we see the sockets here as well, as we did on the earlier 13th century one, where the iron bars would have been there to tie the windows in place. The most elaborate window here in St. Mary's is actually the window over the west doorway here. And it's an interesting 2-light window. This particular window has wonderful tracery, as we can see here. It also has this hood moulding that we get in the late medieval period. This dates to the 15th, 16th century. And on either side of it, we see a pair of mythical or medieval beasts. And this was quite common. You either get beasts like these to have symbolic meaning, or else you can actually get human heads. Sometimes those heads actually represent the donors, sometimes maybe the saint associated with the site. Of course, all we really got here is a feel for the medieval window. We couldn't discuss the glass because there's actually no glass surviving here. Any evidence we have of medieval glass here in Ireland comes from excavation or comes from documentary sources. If we want to understand stained glass and get an idea of how it might have looked in the past, we need to look at the modern stained glass of the 20th century.
So we've left the Caramelized Abbey and we've moved the short distance to St. Brendan's Cathedral. Neo-Gothic structure, so has connections with the Abbey. And in this instance, it's late 19th century. Perhaps not very remarkable from the outside, but once we come in, what we notice straight away is the stained glass. There's this fabulous collection of early 20th century Irish stained glass in the arts and crafts tradition. All of it is by the artists of An Túr or the Tower of Glass, a studio that was founded in 1903 by the artist Sarah Purser and by Edward Martin, who has very strong local connections in Ardrahan. And we're going to look at some of the windows in the cathedral in detail. We can't look at them all because there's 25 of them, but we're going to look at a few. So in medieval times, stained glass was often regarded as the Bible of the poor. People often couldn't read, and so stained glass had a very strong kind of narrative or instructional quality to it, often using multi-panels in a window. So for instance, behind me we have 2 3-light windows, both of them with a strong narrative content. The Nativity on the left, the Passion on the right. But if we look at the Nativity in particular, we'll notice on the top left we've got the angel, Gabriel, appearing to the Blessed Virgin, but she's over on the top right. And then the next scene of interest chronologically is the Visitation, which is the bottom left. We've got Mary and her cousin Elizabeth embracing, and she's pregnant with St. John the Baptist. And we have to move around a bit. Obviously the center panel is the most important. It's the birth of Jesus, the standard nativity scene. But I think some of the more charming panels, which maybe have the most kind of medieval resonance, are the ones depicting the shepherds. So if we look at the very top, we see the angel appearing to 2 shepherds as a flock of sheep. What's intriguing about them is that they're sort of dressed in medieval garb. They're wearing a lot of clothes. The man on the left has kind of leather leggings, and he's got his pouch full of money. And it's not what we normally associate with scenes set in the Holy Land. And if we move to the middle on the left, here we have the shepherds again, and they're at the nativity scene, paying homage to the baby Jesus. And again, they're kind of straight out of medieval or Flemish painting, maybe. But what's interesting is that the figure who is in the foreground, he has kind of a Middle Eastern scarf about his neck, this black and white checkered scarf. But they do have a very strong kind of medieval quality to them that's a bit at variance with the other figures that are more kind of generically dressed as one might expect them to be in a nativity scene. So of all the artists from Untitled who have work in the cathedral, there's one who stands out. It's Michael Healy, because his very first solo window, St. Simeon, is here, but also one of his final windows, The Last Judgment, and that's the window behind me here. It actually took 4 years to do, completed in 1940. And what's interesting about it is, thematically, The Last Judgment is not something we see 20th century artists dealing with regularly, very much more of a medieval theme. What's unusual about it, I suppose, is that it's showing a very sort of judgmental, literally judgmental Christ, and it's very didactic, it's cautionary, it's telling us how to lead a good life and the consequences of not doing so. So we see God the Father in judgment up at the top in the center, and then on the extreme left at the bottom you see the saved, and there they are, hands clasped in prayer. They look very blissful, they're bobbing along in sort of a sea of tranquility. And once our eye moves towards the right, we begin to see what happens if you don't lead this prayerful religious existence. And we see the damned, and their faces are contorted, they're in turmoil, there's little sparks of red that suggests maybe flames and fire, damnation. Although it's not a medieval window in terms of style and treatment, in terms of subject matter and theme, it very much is. It's typical of what one would find in medieval churches and cathedrals. It's a warning to the faithful, how to behave, what kind of life to live, and the consequences of not doing so, which are pretty grim, as you can see. The final recruit to Untitled was Evie Hone, who's one of the big names in Irish stained glass. She worked alongside Michael Healy. She learned much of her craft from him, but her style couldn't be more different. She came from an entirely different tradition. She was a modernist, she was an abstract painter. So when we see her work, we're going to expect something very different. She has 2 windows in the cathedral, one of St. Bridget, done a year after Michael Healy died in 1942. And then she has the very last window that's in the main body of the cathedral, the rose window behind me. And the theme is the creation. And in many ways, of all the windows in the cathedral, this is the one that's probably most medievally inspired. Evie Hone, we know, had a particular interest in medieval sculpture. She has certainly seen all the windows on the continent. She was very well versed. And we see in the really strong use of colour, kind of the medieval context that she's drawing upon. So the strong blues, the reds, the green, the gold. And she uses a lot of symbols, and these would have been very commonplace in medieval stained glass as well. So in the center circle, we have God the Father, represented by the hand. We've got the dove, representing the Holy Spirit. And we've got the Pax Christi symbol, representing Christ. So in effect, we have the Trinity. But if you look closer, you're also going to see the sun and the moon, referencing creation. You're going to see the symbols Alpha and Omega, the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, which are representative of Christ, the beginning and the end. And then in the peripheral stained glass, the 6 little smaller panels that are almost semicircular, we have different subject matters. And we have a lion representing the earth. We've got a pelican representing the sea. We've got a creature, sort of a fantastical creature representing fire. And then we've got an eagle representing air. And then the other 2 final ones are Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and you've got the snake, again, very medieval in subject matter. And then at the bottom we have the Tree of Life, again, something that we find a lot in medieval stained glass. So it's a wonderful concluding window that finishes a series of stained glass windows in St Brendan's Cathedral that started in 1903 and then concludes with Evie Hunt's Rose in 1950.
Hello there, welcome to Loughrea. My name is Joe Lucknan. Today we're doing our audio tour, video tour of the town of Loughrea as per our published material. I'm standing here in front of St Brendan's Cathedral in Loughrea. Now we've chosen this area to start our walk because there's at least 6 or 7 monuments on the grounds of this building. Number one, I have the cathedral behind me, and just to my left here is the Diocesan Museum. In front of me is the town moat gate. On my right, we have a monument to Father Griffin, his burial place in Loughrea, who was killed by the Black and Tans in Galway during our War of Independence. Down below that is a monument to the men of 1916, donated by a family here in Loughrea. We also have a monument to a Bishop Courtney that was killed out in Africa. To my left, across the road, is the old potato market, where bags of potatoes were weighed. The scales are still there today. So there's a lot here on this little spot. When we leave here, we go out one of the gates of the cathedral, we turn right, we go down Moore Street and we go towards O'Dee's Hotel. We're also travelling along the eastern edge of the little river from the lake, which was part of the town defences during Norman times. We've just left the cathedral. We've gone towards Moore Street and past the convent and the little laneway that leads to St Bridget's Well. I'm down here now at Riverside along the bank of the river. O'Dee's Hotel is to my left. I believe it was there in Loughrea many, many years before the railway even arrived here as a hostelry. To my rear here is the old cathedral, which is dated from the 17th century. It was vacated around 1906 when they opened the new cathedral. To my left, the moat of the river in the walks meets the stream coming from the lake. That is the main part of the defences of Loughrea. Also to my front is the old weir, where I believe eels were trapped in days gone by that were sent off to Billingsgate Market in London. From here now we're going to go towards the walks. We'll be passing the old railway station and down towards the Abbey and the Abbey Cemetery and on towards Abbey Street, which also had one of the old town castles. We've just walked up the walks from the O'Dee's Hotel end. We're now here at the corner of the old St Mary's Abbey. On my left is still the old moat, the only surviving moat in Ireland, the defences of Loughrea, which came down from the lake. Beside that is the wall which leads into the Burbage plots, private property, the gardens at the rear of the houses from the main street. To my right is the new Abbey today and the seminary there for the Carmelites. Also ahead of me at Abbey Lane is where there was an old town revenue gate and one of the other gates in Loughrea. From here now we will follow the moat towards the West Bridge, which also had one of the town gates. We can finish the tour here now as we proceed towards the lake in Loughrea and the source of the moat. There are many, many other interesting features walking about Loughrea. You just have to come here and experience them. And we hope to see you here sometime in the future to do the walk of Loughrea.
Hi, I'm Rachel from Loughrea Craft Club and I'm here today as part of the virtual Loughrea Medieval Festival, and this is part 2 of our medieval mini makes for crafts to do at home. Now in the first video we made a really cool jester's hat and collar. Now to finish off the outfit we're making a little jester's stick, also known as a marotte. So jesters would have used this as part of their routine and it's kind of fun little character. So I'm going to show you how to make him now. So for this mini make you're going to need a stick from the garden, some air drying clay, markers or paint markers, some ribbon, bells, optional sequins and a pair of scissors. So first of all, we're going to take some of the air drying clay. I like to use the white version because it doesn't seem to get your hands as dirty. this will dry in approximately 24 hours. So just take a lump and we're going to start moulding it into the Jester's face. Firstly, we're going to start putting some shape to the clay. So we're going to kind of give him a bit of a neck shape and then start forming his face. Now we want him to have a 3-pointed Jester's hat, just like the Jester's hat we made earlier. So you can just start making 3 points, one at the top and then one at each side. So there's our little Jester's head, and we've got 3 points of his hat and kind of a neck shape. So before I do any more details, I actually want to add the stick, and then we'll do a few fine details afterwards. I've just picked up a stick from the garden and I've cut it to about 20 centimetres long. Now I'm just going to take my Jester's head and just pop that in side like that into his neck. I know it looks cruel, but he won't mind. Okay, so he's starting to look quite cute, but I think he needs a nose. So I've got a little bit of extra clay here. I'm just going to add a nose now onto his face to give him some more funny features. Before the clay dries, I want to add a few sequins to his neck. Now this is totally optional, you don't have to do this, but I have a few lying around, so I thought it might look nice and sparkly. There's our Jester's head with sequins attached. I'm going to leave him to dry now. The instructions on my clay say 24 hours, and just read your instructions. It's going to differ depending on what brand you're using. So I'm going to pop him aside and come back to him tomorrow. Okay, so my clay's dried now. So now for the fun part, and we're going to do some decoration. I'm going to use my paint markers to colour in his face and his hat. So I've finished with my painting of the Jester's face. He's looking pretty cute. Coloured in his hat, done a cute little face and just some dots around the neck as well. Now to add some finishing touches, I've got these really cute little bells. So you should be able to pick these up from the art and hobby shop. If not, you can use beads or anything similar that you might have lying around, but they do add a nice kind of jangle to the Jester stick. Now we're going to tie the ribbon onto the stick. I've just got some of this inexpensive parcel ribbon, or you could use string or wool, anything that you might have at home already. So we're just going to tie it to the top of the stick. So we're going to simply thread the bells onto the end of the ribbon. I have a loop for this and secure it with a double knot. If you need a hand with this, you can also ask an adult to help. So you want to do that at both ends of the ribbon. I'm going to add a second bit of ribbon. I've got a couple more bells left. You can add as many bits of ribbon as you like, make him nice and jangly, and he's going to look really fun and sound great as well. Ta-da! So there we go, there's our whole ensemble finished, our Jester's hat, Jester's collar and little Jester stick. So you can have fun with him for performances and making mischief. So I hope you've enjoyed watching and being part of the Loughrea Virtual Medieval Festival. It's been lots of fun to do, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
You're welcome to St Brendan's Cathedral, Loughrea. I'm standing here beside a copy of a picture which hangs in Györ Cathedral in Hungary, a picture of Our Lady, Consoler of the Afflicted. The origins of the original picture go back to the 1600s and to Bishop Walter Lynch, who was Bishop of Clonfert Diocese. He had to flee Ireland as a result of the Cromwellian persecutions of the 1600s. He was one of the last, if not the last, bishop to leave Ireland. But he eventually found himself on the continent, and in Vienna he met up with Bishop Puszki of Györ in Hungary, who welcomed him to the cathedral in Györ to minister there. Bishop Walter Lynch died unexpectedly as he was preparing to return to Ireland, and among his possessions was the picture of Our Lady, Consoler of the Afflicted. people of Györ, in honour of Bishop Walter Lynch, hung that picture in their cathedral. And then a miraculous event occurred. On the 17th of March, 1697, the same year that the Act of Banishment was passed in Ireland, banishing priests and bishops from Ireland under pain of death. On that day, 17th of March, 1697, the picture of Our Lady, Consoler of the Afflicted, shed tears of blood. And those attending Mass in Györ Cathedral that morning witnessed it. It has become the centre of Marian devotion in Hungary since. That picture still hangs in their cathedral. And people pray through the intercession of Our Blessed Lady, Consoler of the Afflicted, or as they have come to call her, the Irish Madonna, as we refer to her here now as Our Lady of Györ. Because of the links between Hungary and Ireland through Bishop Walter Lynch and through the welcome he received when he was in exile, a copy of that original painting was presented here to the cathedral in Loughrea, and it has hung here for some years now. But during the pandemic, or since the pandemic started, and people were unable to attend church, I moved the picture to the sanctuary area of the cathedral, where it could be seen on the cathedral webcam for those who were tuning in. And many people have recognised it. Many people have recognised that it's a copy of the picture hanging in Györ Cathedral, the Irish Madonna, Our Lady, Consoler of the Afflicted, Our Lady of Györ. So we're delighted to have that link with Hungary. We're delighted to acknowledge the welcome that Bishop Walter Lynch received as an exile from Ireland, as a refugee from Ireland, as someone who had to flee his native country because of persecution. And he received a kindly welcome from the people of Hungary in the Diocese of Györ. And this picture reminds us, a copy of the original, of the links between Ireland and Hungary.
Az 1470-es évek étkezési kultúrája. A visegrádi királyi palotában járunk, amelyet a 14.-15. században építettek ki királyi székhelynek, majd ezt követően vidéki rezidenciává vált. A 15. századi étkezési kultúra jelentősen eltér a ma megszokottól. A királyi vagy nemesi lakomákat megelőzte a kézmosás, amely során a szolgák egy kancsó és egy tál segítségével segítettek az uraknak. A szolgákon lévő kendő, amelybe a nemes urak a kezeiket törölték, drága importáru. A lakoma szinte minden elemében a nemes úr gazdagságát fejezte ki. Az étkezés során több fogást szolgáltak fel. Az első fogás a kenyér volt. A legdrágábbnak a fehér kenyér számított. A köznép kenyere a barna kenyér volt. A sót a fehér aranynak nevezték, mivel drága volt. Éppen ezért a külön ezüst sótartóban tartott só a lakomát adó nemes úr gazdagságát fejezte ki. A ma ismert étkezési rend nem alakult ki. Nem ismerték a leves, a főétel és a desszert sorrendet. Ez a rend csak később, a 17. században alakult ki francia hatásra. Egy fordulóban több fogást hoztak ki. Olyan ételek kerültek ki az asztalra, mint a töltött csirke, a húsokhoz készülő borsó, vagyis zöldmártás, vagy a megymártás. Nagyon népszerűek voltak a különböző sós vagy édes piték, amelyeket akkoriban pástétomnak hívtak. Emellett felszolgáltak fűszeres rizskását, gyömbérkenyeret és vadnyulat hagymás szószban. Mindegyik ételt sokféle fűszerrel készítettek el. Például egy-egy húsételhez a só, a bors és a zöld fűszerek mellett sáfrányt, fahéjat és gyömbért is használhattak. Szívesen ették együtt az édes, a sós és a savanyú ételeket is. A felszolgálók különböző szerepeket töltöttek be. Mivel kiváltságnak számított a királyt szolgálni, a felszolgálók mind nemesi származásúak voltak. Volt, aki csak felszolgálta, és volt, aki csak felszeletelte az ételeket, de a bor kitöltésére is külön szolgálót bíztak meg. A lakoma utolsó fogásaként valamilyen különleges ételt szolgáltak fel, jelen esetben egy marcipántortát. A lakoma végeztével a nemesek elvonultak a táncmulatságra.
This is the town of Loughrea, and you can see the boundary of the medieval town here. And this is the lake, and then this is the townland of Earls Park down here. So we're standing about here at the moment, and the wall of the deer park is basically all the way round the edge of the townland boundary. The whole thing is about a mile in each direction, and it's 913 acres. So my name's Fiona Beglane, I'm an archaeologist, and I was invited here today by two local archaeologists to give them a tour of Earls Park, which was the medieval park associated with the de Burghs at Loughrea. So when the de Burghs came to Loughrea, the first thing that they would have done is to build a castle, because that was the key to the defence of the area. And then they would have built the town and built a wall around the town to protect the town. And then after that, that was when they would have built the deer park. It would have been, the site of it would have been laid out in advance. They knew where they were going to put it, but it would have been slightly down the priority list compared to obviously making sure that you're safe and secure. But yeah, see that it's been reused from something. So here what we've got is we've got the gateway to the park, and this survives to its full height, which is brilliant because we get an idea of how tall the gate actually was, and it survives to its width, which is about 10 foot. And this is a very visible part of the site. It's something that's very definite. It's definitely not just a bit of a wall, it's a structure that tells us something about the importance of the park. This is where the door would have closed against this, and so you can see that it would have closed in from the inside of the townland, and it would have probably been a big solid door made out of oak. And here you've got this hole, and that hole is for the drawbar, where the door would have been closed up at night, for example, or to stop people getting in. And again, that's from the outside, so that's telling us something about access to the park and who was allowed in and who was allowed out. The main thing that I found was that the entire townland of Earls Park is the medieval park, and the whole thing is bounded by a mortared stone wall that in places is up to 2.5 metres high, and that's completely different to any of the normal field boundaries that you might find. This park would have been built by the de Burghs, and they founded Loughrea in 1236, and it's mentioned in 1333 after the death of one of the members of the family, and so it was built sometime in between the two. One of the things that the Anglo-Normans were very keen to do was to take on places that were already significant in the landscape. So you've got a whole cluster of monuments there, like the big 70-metre enclosure, a hill fort, a smaller enclosure, some ponds, various different features like that, that are all in the same area. It's of national, even international importance. It's a huge site. It's 913 acres. That makes it the biggest park that we know of in Ireland. Deer are a status symbol because they're outside the normal agricultural pattern of life. So if you keep cattle or sheep or you grow crops, you've got a level of certainty. But if you're going to go out and hunt for meat, then there's a level of uncertainty. So for ordinary people, hunting doesn't really make sense. It makes more sense to invest time in your animals. So wild animals and hunting wild animals became a very high status thing. So it was something that was done by the lords and the aristocracy because they had time to do it. They knew that there was going to be dinner on the table, even if they didn't catch anything. It's always nice to meet other people like Christy and Bernie and show them around sites, because when you go around a site with somebody else who's got a different perspective on it, sometimes they pick out items, pick out bits of the landscape that you haven't noticed yourself. And already today I've got so many more ideas about the place.